Welcome to SAEM26. And now, please welcome Program Committee Chair Dr. Sanjay Gupta, SAEM President Dr. Jody Vogel, and SAEM Past President Michelle Lahl.
All right, well, good morning and welcome back to the SAEM26 main stage. Yesterday, this room was filled with ideas that challenged us, that inspired us, and that reminded us why academic emergency medicine continues to lead at the edge of change. And today, we build on that momentum.
Because what happens at a meeting like this isn't just learning, it's alignment. It's the moment where thousands of individual efforts all begin to move in the same direction. And that's where real progress begins.
And of course, it's also where we make sure you're fully awake. So let's start day 2 the same way we started yesterday, with a little surprise. Somewhere in this room, one of you is about to have a very good morning. Let's find out who.
Stand up, stand up.
Oh, it's Louis.
That's fine, all right.
Congratulations, you just won $200 in cash. And for everyone else, stay alert, because around here, inspiration and prizes tend to show up when you least expect them.
That energy is exactly what makes this community special. But today, we also take time to recognize something deeper: excellence, dedication, and the individuals whose work continues to elevate our field. Let's begin our Day 2 Awards presentation.
Hal Jane Excellence in Education Award, Amal Matu. Arnold P. Gold Foundation Humanism in Medicine Award, Scott Weiner. Mentor Award, Wendy Coates. Public Health Leadership Award, Emmy Betts. Public Health Leadership Award, Bhakti Hansuti. Early Educator Award, Allison Bollier. Early Educator Award, Janice Shin Kim. Early Educator Award, Shane Gu. Early Educator Award, Onyeyechi Eke. FOMED Excellence in Education Award, Jennifer Beck Esme. Rams Leadership in Emergency Medicine Award, Kristen Panthagani. Rams Excellence in Education Award, Kevin Walsh. Rams Excellence in Education Award, Eileen Williams. Rams Excellence in Research Award, Oluwafemi Owaduni. Fellow Award, Jonathan Warren. Fellow Award, Dushara Surapaneni. Fellow Award, Alexander Clark. Fellow Award, Leah Colucci. Fellow Award, Lachlan Driver. Fellow Award, Mitchell Blendon. Outstanding Department Award for Wellness, Indiana University School of Medicine, Department of Emergency Medicine. Congratulations to our SAEM Award winners.
So education is the foundation of everything we do. It shapes how we train, how we learn, and ultimately, how we care for patients. Today's keynote speaker has dedicated her career to advancing how we teach and how we learn in emergency medicine. Please welcome Dr. Laura Hopson.
Good morning. Welcome to this amazing SAEM26, and thank you for the opportunity to spend about the next half hour with you thinking about how generative AI is really starting to transform not only our daily lives, but our educational environment, and maybe imbuing some principles as to how we can think about this technology in a way that lets us take control of it, rather than just be the passive recipients of an externally imposed entity, so to speak. So I have no financial disclosures. This talk grew out of a talk that I did with a colleague at University of Michigan. And I think as with every talk and every undertaking, it's not an individual effort. And there are so many people who have contributed ideas, sent me papers, sent me blog posts, asked probing questions that changed how I thought about this, that have really informed this conversation. The other thing I want to recognize is just the incredible environment that exists in emergency medicine to tackle medical education and the development of our learners. Every time I delve into the literature, there's an emergency medicine physician driving the conversation around medical education. And I want to recognize that amazing community that exists for us. So over the next little bit, I want to think about what the parallels and actually the divergences are between the internal processes of generative AI and human clinical reasoning. I want you all to think about the potential risks and benefits of how we integrate AI into the medical education environment. And I want you all to at least start to have a set of strategies that we can use that really in the face of this transformative technology, we can think about to preserve and foster the foundational cognitive skills that are so critical to our practice as emergency physicians. So the reality is AI is here. That surprises no one. It's embedded in our electronic medical records. It's on our phone. We're using it. Our patients are using it. Our learners are using it. And the pace of change is just going exponentially upward. I would also argue it's our professional obligation as the specialty that focuses on the immediate decision-making and actions necessary to prevent death and disability to really grapple with how we integrate this technology so that our trainees, our learners, ourselves as lifelong learners really can develop and maintain those skills that are essential to that decision-making process. When we look at what the environment is changing, if you just look at one AI company's prediction of the impact of the labor market, they think we're at moderately high risk to have change as healthcare providers. This is from Anthropic's website. We're also seeing the popular media grapple with what this means and raising, I think, some pertinent questions about what actually AI does to us as physicians. What does it do to our skills? And there's actually some early evidence that makes these concerns have some grounding. So one classic study actually comes from the GI literature, and many of you may have seen this already, but if you give a group of endoscopists an AI device that assists in polyp detection during colonoscopy, they do better than their baseline. If you take that AI assistance away, they're actually worse than they were before. It's a process that's called deskilling. Radiology has been probably the most advanced in incorporating AI. Makes sense with the media in which they work. And they're starting to develop a much more nuanced view of that human technology interface that I think is going to be very important for us to consider. So if you give a good radiologist a good AI system, they actually get better. If you give a good radiologist a bad AI system, they're worse. And you know what? It doesn't matter what kind of AI system you give someone if they're not already a good radiologist. It degrades their performance. And then there's a study from 2025 that looks more generally at how people interface with AI. It's great for content generation, but it may not be so great for decision making. And if you look at the level of AI engagement and the willingness to engage in what's called active problem solving in this study, the level of AI engagement decreases the level of active problem solving. And I think that's going to be the key question for us as we wrestle with what is our clinical reasoning, our diagnostic reasoning, our decision-making process in the emergency department. This is a manuscript that I would recommend that everyone familiarize themselves with. It's a August 2025 New England Journal of Medicine publication. And they do a fantastic job of summarizing the current state of literature and understanding and also starting to propose some solutions. So you heard a little bit already about where the challenges may lie. In an ideal state, as with that radiology study, we're going to see augmentation of human capacity. But what we have a tendency to see is what's called deskilling, or loss of capacity. And they also introduce another capacity called misskilling, which is where we start to see biases creep in. We start to see misuse of systems and getting inappropriate answers because our inputs are bad. And then very pertinent to our development of the next generation of learners is this concept of never skilling, that you can avoid ever developing foundational skills because of the use of artificial intelligence. When we think about how AI functions, we can start to see maybe some parallels to human clinical reasoning and how that develops. So as we're developing an AI system, you're going to take reams of data, reams of information, and feed it into that system. And that may be novels, textbooks, research articles, Reddit posts, whatever they pull from. And this is going to contain a set of biases. But what it does is create a system that is able to create text prediction. What is most likely to follow next? And this is an incredibly powerful tool. As we all know, the user interfaces with it through some sort of text-based written query or prompt, and then we get an output. But this sort of text prediction can be described as plausible truth, that it's based on what's most likely and not actually reality. So if I put in the quick brown fox, you're probably going to get jumps over the lazy dog out. But what if the quick brown fox runs under the car or through a fence? We have other potential alternatives that may not be exposed to us. And this sort of probabilistic text generation really explains why AI can hallucinate or confabulate and create wrong answers. We can extend this encoding and decoding analogy to humans as they learn clinical reasoning as well. We have our foundational knowledge, our data source, our textbooks, our expert professors, whatever resources we're using. We integrate it, though, with clinical experience and repetition. And through a process of feedback and reflection, we're going to go learn the skills of information gathering and hypothesis generation. How do we represent problems? And how do we generate differential diagnoses and treatment and management decisions? Yeah, we've still got our own set of biases, but we're also going to bring some very powerful tools that I think we can lean into to augment human capacity. And that's, we exist in a context that we're surrounded by systems, we're surrounded by ethics, we're surrounded by other people with expertise and different insights, which can really develop our own decision-making capacity as long as we're willing to use them. And our output is our clinical decision-making, the conversations, the diagnoses we make, the investigations we undertake, and ultimately the care we take of our patients. So we've got some parallels. We both develop patterns. We both develop probabilities. When you hear hoofbeats, you don't think of zebras. We've all said that 1,000 times. We may have mismatch of competence and competence. And to some degree, we look similar, so maybe we trust what comes out. But there are also some important divergences. And as I mentioned before, AI doesn't have context. It doesn't have the ability to think about its thinking. It may not recognize uncertainty, which is, I think, incredibly important in the practice of emergency medicine. How often do we make a decision on incomplete, sometimes inaccurate information, dynamic information, and then revise? That's us. That's our field. We also exist in context. We take in cues from the environment. We listen to how our patient sounds. We look at their work of breathing. We do a physical exam. We're also in a system. Some of my best diagnoses are because one of my colleagues, a nurse, a tech, pointed out something and said, hey, what do you think of this? I'm worried. And that system embodiment of expertise has become increasingly appreciated as important in our decision-making and our own expertise. And as I said before, we carry ethics. So the question for all of us is, what happens when this system of humans learning clinical decision-making starts to look like this, which is exactly what those radiology studies were hinting at. is we're now working in a hybrid system where that human technology interface becomes critical. That it's not just the human, it's not just the technology, it's how they work together, and can they do it synergistically in a way that augments our capacity. So let's back up for 2 seconds and go back to some of the underpinnings of human expertise and how humans have developed the ability to reason clinically. We really see a developmental arc, and we start out as novices, very rule-driven. Every chest pain patient gets a chest x-ray, a troponin, and an EKG. Period, end of story. And for me to think analytically is a lot of effort. And I think all of us have walked a novice learner through what's the differential diagnosis of a 27-year-old with chest pain. It takes time, it's effortful, it's hard. But what that work does is start to build things called illness scripts. And these are really a constellation of signs, symptoms, context clues, other phenomena that exist as a chunk in our working memory. And it's a way that we organize knowledge to facilitate its easy retrieval and to reduce our cognitive load. And as we develop expertise, those illness scripts, those patterns, are progressively refined, and our ability to retrieve those patterns becomes better and better. We can still shift to an analytic mode. And many of you are familiar with this sort of dual processing theory, thinking fast, thinking slow, that was popularized in a book a little over a decade ago. But humans exist a lot of time in this pattern recognition mode. It's a sophisticated pattern recognition mode, that has a lot of complexity to it. We can also switch to that effortful analytic thought. Neither of these are perfect. They both carry different risks of biases, different outcomes, but they're both powerful tools. And increasingly, what we've come to realize about clinical reasoning and expertise is it exists in context, that it is situated in the environment in which it occurs, what's around us, what the prevalence of disease is in our environment, who are the other people with expertise, and what are the other resources that we can draw on in real time to move our decision-making forward. So it's not just internal, it's all of us. It's the internal component and the external compartment. And as we think about that information, and we think about how AI may move in, there are a few places that I want to deliberately call out where this can go awry. We already touched on the problem of hallucinations, that our output is really based on most likely. And this may not necessarily be what the truth is. And we also know from a recent study that medical students are lousy at developing bad output. They're about coin flip good. That's a problem. There's a critical concept that's also emerging called automation bias. And this is where we believe the output. And over multiple users, we really see scaling of error. Does open evidence give me a diagnosis when I put something in and I stick to it and it gets perpetuated in the chart? There are many ways that this can manifest, and I think it's a critical element of bias we have to be thoughtful of. Speaking of bias, we already mentioned that the bias exists in the system based on what's fed into it. Same prompt, 3 different systems. You know what? That looks like the same medical student to me. But our reality is there may be medical students that look like this, but there are going to be different heights, different body types, different physical characteristics, different genders. This is one truth, it's not all the truths. And to me, this really illustrates what the challenge is with AI. Interestingly, I inadvertently did this experiment a year ago, and you know what I got? I got a dark-haired male medical student when I kept putting into different prompts. So the bias has changed, but it's still there. And it's important to recognize that there are many truths of which we may only get one. and that impacts the care of our patients. If you take a database that's derived in a low-risk set of patients and use it for clinical guidance in a high-risk set of patients, it may not give you the right answer. We already mentioned these critical threats, that we erode or never develop skills as a result of AI use. And I also want us to think about our system. And this fits also with that idea that the human-technology interface may be a really critical component of this. And the reality is our systems reward speed. If you ask a whole bunch of us what makes a good ER doc, they're probably going to say efficiency, speed, the ability to handle multiple simultaneous patients. We need to be careful that we protect the effortful component of learning that is so important to developing these illness scripts. And then we let our novices work through the processes that gain them experience, that give them feedback on their thought processes, their prioritization, and create that growth and expertise. So as I reflected on this, it often seems like it's a mess and we're just lost in the jungle. Probably the most logical way forward that anyone can see is that we need to think about how do we make the implicit explicit? How do we start to transparently address what's going on with AI and its impact with us, and hopefully use that as a model to engage learners? And when I say learners, I mean all of us, from the most junior medical student to the most senior faculty in the room. We're all learning. We all have cognitive work to do. We all can refine and build our expertise. And we need to be intentional about how we discuss the role of AI with this. So, on the system level, I think there's some strategies we can use. The concept of scaffolding exists in medical education to provide structure, think about how we titrate structure to the needs of our learners. It's also been extended really to the concept of AI. AI can be scaled from the human only to AI only. AI only, not going there, not ready for prime time, particularly in healthcare. But we do have some models that have been cleverly named the Centaur and the Cyborg that describe either a human prominent with AI backup or a human AI continual interface system that we are seeing already in healthcare. And thinking critically on the system level about how we control these tools, how we dole them out, how we make decisions on their use, and where is their use appropriate in the developmental trajectory of our learners and ourselves is going to be important. And there's a very nice manuscript in JGME, actually by an emergency physician out of Stanford, that gives us a model to think about how much we can lean into a particular AI tool that may have the capacity to reduce low-value work and still preserve, or at least find ways to assess that learning differently within our clinical environment. And this is directly germane to something I think is taking over all of our daily lives, and that's ambient documentation as support. We know it reduces workload. We've got maybe some evidence that it's also reducing the burnout that plagues our specialty. Yeah, it's not perfect. There's some context issues. We all grumble about it. But I think the biggest risk to our development of clinical expertise is that it removes that drive to synthesize information. And how do we interface with this in a way that still challenges our learners, that gives them the reps, that gives them the feedback, that they develop that expertise, that illness script, that cognitive chunk that they can easily retrieve in the future. And we have some data coming out of the University of Michigan. This is a partial data set that we broke into early to look at, using senior medical students. And we gave them a standardized patient interaction, both with and without an ambient documentation system. And then we looked at their note as an artifact of their clinical reasoning and used a previously published scoring system You know what's worrisome? Is they look worse. Their note, at least, doesn't look as robust. And I think we're going to need to grapple with this. They did, however, very thoughtfully reflect, and I will say a lot of these students had never used these systems before, but they thought hard about it. And we saw some positives, that maybe it augmented their communication skills. We also saw things like this, that I don't think I was thinking as clearly about what I need, the information that I needed. And this is the area that I think we all need to lean into in our research, in our daily practice to deal with. So Abdul Noor, who is the author of the 2025 New England Journal article, has proposed this model for supervision of AI. Now, we're all familiar with the 1-minute preceptor. This is also designed to be 1 to 2 minutes. And it's a quick series of questions. Did you use AI? What were your inputs? What were your outputs? How did this work? How do you verify its accuracy? And what's your use in the future? Again, making the implicit explicit. And the other thing we're seeing with AI is maybe a tremendous capacity to augment humans. And this is, I think, what we can really lean into as educators to think on our models. It may increase our ability to reflect on practice. This is work being done by some of my colleagues that's an automated chart synthesis to get people feedback on their care. And the idea is, can't prove it yet, but they're working on it, is that it may add into expertise if we reduce those barriers to gaining feedback on our performance. It's an incredibly powerful potential piece of, it's a piece of technology with potentially incredible power. And again, out of Stanford, we see the power of AI to actually grapple with the massive amounts of really ugly data, often text-based data, that exists in our electronic medical record. And even in this limited study, what you can see is that our learners have very different experiences across the course of residency. And being able to actually interrogate what those experiences are may now let us customize their education so that they can have the experiences that they need to really develop as physicians. And we're also seeing a pattern of our educators innovating with this technology and thinking about ways to expand their own capacity and their learners' capacity. Things like developing practice sandboxes to get those repetitions and to get feedback on your performance, to rapidly generate content for test questions, reflective questions, simulation settings, develop learning plans that maybe it doesn't take me 6 months to define a curriculum, maybe it only takes me a few weeks. That's a tremendous boost to our capacity. But right now, where we are is an area of massive knowledge gaps. And this is where I think our audience really comes in, is that we have the expertise to think about and study and research how this technology impacts us as learners, our traditional learners, our patients, our systems, and start to take control of this technology and grapple with it in a very transparent method. As usual, our ethicists may be leading the way, and they've proposed a 4-pillar system that I'm going to leave you with. That let's think about AI as how do we preserve our human strengths? How do we make it complementary to what our activities are? How do we create a system of graduated opportunity? Graduated autonomy, and how are we transparent about the limitations of its capabilities? So AI's here. It's an elephant in the room. We're all too often letting it hide in the background, and I think it's time to make our interaction with this transformative technology explicit with the goal that we're going to take control of it and make it another skill set that we all have to master, just like the decision to order a particular test. And this is going to need reflection, scaffolding, critical interrogation. so that we build on rather than replace human capacity.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Hopson. That was so important, such information that we need right now in our current time, impacting all of us in our clinical settings. Let's talk a little bit more about some of the ideas that you presented. You had talked a bit about being intentional about protecting reasoning. So what is one concrete thing that an individual clinician educator could do differently in their next teaching shift to be more intentional about protecting reasoning skill development?
Probably what we should be doing anyway. It's just asking the why question. Why did you decide to order this head CT? Why did you order this test? What was your thought? What is it going to do? And being explicit about extending that to, you used an AI tool. How did that help you? How did that hurt you? And what do you think about the outputs? So really making it a conversation and a thoughtful reflection rather than, great, you just got the head CT.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, an exchange of ideas between the educator and the learner.
Exactly.
Yeah, and you mentioned that cognitive effort is a major mechanism of how people learn. And how do you respond to some of the counter arguments maybe some of us have heard that reducing cognitive load, such as that potentially provided by AI, frees up mental resources for higher order thinking, and that the struggle for its own sake isn't always educationally productive?
So there's a concept known as the zone of proximal development, which is the area in which people gain strength, which if you extend it to an athletic analogy, if you don't work hard enough to make your muscles slightly sore, you don't gain strength, you don't gain capacity. If you overwork yourself, you end up injured. And we want our learners in that zone of development, that sort of what's called productive struggle, and being thoughtful about the incorporation of these tools so that we're not taking away useful work, but unweighting unuseful work is, I think, really where we're going to have to grapple with this interface. And that answer is going to be different whether I have an undergrad, a medical student, a resident at various levels, a faculty member with various levels of experience. And that answer may actually change based on the technology that comes out. But sitting in that zone of productive effort is where we want all of our learners to be.
So you're suggesting there is a happy medium between having the support of the artificial intelligence while still flexing your cognitive muscles?
Exactly.
Okay, all right. And you had, AI tools are not distributed equally across training environments. We've all seen that, different resources at different centers. Obviously, that impacts our learners. So for residents at well-resourced centers, they may have a variety of tools and various technology available to them, while at other centers, the learners may have less resources available and far less exposure. So what are the implications for how we think about this when we consider our learners and the education?
Yeah, so I think one of the issues is probably less access, since they're so relatively easily available in multiple systems, but quality of systems. And are we pushing our learners and ourselves toward bad systems in the interests of ease of access? And being willing to understand the capacity of the various systems. And it doesn't, I think, have to be an individual understanding. It has to be a system-level understanding of what's appropriate, what's safe, what gives good answers, what gives the most transparent answers or additional resources, rather than just being willing to take a face value an output at its face value without questioning its underpinnings. So the access is there. Probably the biggest thing I would say that is within all of our capabilities is to provide training about how to use these systems and how to be thoughtful and intentional about them and have a conversation about your use.
Mm-hmm. And for those at lower resource settings, how would they engage with the different tools that are available?
Yeah, so every time I open a browser, there's an AI output that pops up. They're I doubt they're free, since what's the old line? If you're either paying for it or you're the product, if you will. But they're available, and the capacity we need, regardless of system resources, is not necessarily the technology, but the instruction and the critique on the use of technology.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And you talked a bit about critical reasoning skills, so I'm curious, how strong is the direct evidence that artificial intelligence is degrading clinical reasoning skills in trainees right now?
A lot of it's speculative. There's a lot of unknown unknowns, and I think it's our job to fill in those gaps.
And how urgently should we act? I mean, artificial intelligence is already within our specialty, within our training environment, so what is the urgency for us as academic emergency medicine physicians and practitioners?
My preference would be that we take control of it now. So my own institution released ambient documentation without telling any of the educators and without putting any constraints on it. Anyone could use it as soon as they opened the switch. Not sure that's the best decision, but being willing to have the conversation with your institution, with your systems from the get-go, to say, develop a set of processes by which we make decisions on who can use what technology and when and how it's safe, is the way I'd argue we need to engage right now.
Mm-hmm. A thoughtful approach is what you're recommending. Mm-hmm. Yes. And we know in academic emergency medicine how busy our emergency departments are. So where efficiency is, valued, particularly with the boarding patients and so on, and physicians are stretched thin, who is responsible for implementing and monitoring the artificial intelligence when there are educational considerations?
Yeah, so this is one of the fears that I think we can all see out there. If we get faster because we have an ambient documentation system and it takes several minutes off our time spent putting information into the electronic medical record, are we then going to free up that space for learning, or are we going to free up that space for, hey, you should go see another few patients? This is going to have to be a conversation between education and operations that sees both perspectives. And it's also going to mean carving out priorities, making education a priority, even when the system optimization may be imperfect. And when we think about some of the precision medical education initiatives coming online that are now really being made possible with this level of technology to understand our learners' experiences and relative strengths and relative areas for development, that's also going to mean protecting that learning space even more so that we can get our learners experiences that they need to really optimize their development and bring them to a level of expertise, especially when their trajectory, as you saw in that one paper, may not be the same as the majority, so that we can have highly functioning emergency physicians. So it's up to us as educators to advocate for that learning space within the clinical environment and recognize that it's important to protect it for our traditional learners, for ourselves, for our affiliated colleagues within our system, whether they be nursing, paramedic, techs, to also have space to learn and process rather than just be a move patients through.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Well, thank you so much for sharing your helpful insight and expertise. These conversations are just what we need to help move our specialty forward. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Please welcome Editor-in-Chief of AEM ENT, Dr. Susan Promes, and SAEM past President, Dr. Michelle Lal.
I got this feeling inside my bones. It goes electric wavy when I turn it on.
That was an outstanding session, and I hope everyone here is leaving with at least one idea they can bring back to their institution.
I agree. And I also hope someone here is leaving with something else, another Peach Prize. Somewhere in this room is a $250 Delta gift card. Take a look under your seat because learning is important, but getting home comfortably doesn't hurt either. Oh, I see him waving in the back. Congratulations. Keep your eyes open. We're not done yet. There will be more prizes to come.
What you're about to hear represents the next generation of ideas in academic emergency medicine. Each of these studies reflect not just strong methodology, but a commitment to asking and answering the questions that matter most. Let's begin. Our first presentation explores how training environments shape outcomes across emergency medicine. Please welcome Dr. Patrick Nasrallah.
Oh, wow. Good morning, everyone. My name is Patrick. I'm one of the emergency medicine residents at Henry Ford Providence, Detroit. And I'm so happy to be here today. I'm grateful for the opportunity to present our work titled Associations Between ABEM, which is the American Board of Emergency Medicine exam pass rates, and residency program characteristics and hospital physician group ownership type from 2021 to 2023. So for disclosures, we don't have any financial disclosures. So for the very first time in October 2025, ABEM published the first-time pass rates at the program level, which was very important and interesting because usually we compared factors about residency success and ABEM pass rates mainly because of individual factors coming from the demographics of the resident, what medical school they came from. But this time we're just focusing on the residency environment and how this will affect the ABEM pass rates. So the objective of the study is to determine associations between residency program characteristics and board pass rates. It's not meant to rank program, but just to understand more the environment that the residents are going through. For the methods we used, like I said, the first pass rates from 2021 to 2023, which were linked to CMS, ACGME, AOA, and IV clinicians. We used ANOVA for a bivariate and a multivariate analysis, and this was the unique thing about our paper is to focus on the multivariate more than the bivariate because we needed to make sure that all the confounding variables are accounting for. We used a weighted two-key post hoc analysis to evaluate the differences between the subgroups, and we weighted the number of test takers between programs because smaller programs had less people taking the test and they could have skewed the results, so we weighted all of them to get adjusted and non-confounding results. So the first table shows the bivariate analysis. I'm going to focus mainly on the qualifying exam more than the oral certifying exam, just for the sake of time. And initially, we found that between 3 and 4 years program, 3 years program and 4 years program, there was no difference in first-time pass rates. However, we did find with the initial accreditation type, if it was ACGME or AOA, there was a difference that was very significant from 92% to 78%. Also, the initial accreditation year, if it was between these brackets, if you can see, all these groups were individualized and groups, and we found significance. Also, we found significance in the ACGME accreditation year because some programs started as an AOA accreditation and switched to ACGME, so we also wanted to see if there was any factor that could have affected that, and we did see that it was significant for the first-time pass rates as well as program size, and teaching hospital status, which was measured by resident to bed ratio, major teaching, non-teaching, and teaching. Also, we found hospital ownership, the for-profit, and compared for-profit, non-profit, and public, and we saw significant difference between the groups, with having the public having the highest rates of pass rates. Ownership, which was a clinician or corporation health or health system, military program, yes or no, and the percent of graduates that are actually taking the exam. And we all find these like positive findings. However, we did not account for the confounding variables. And this was the most important thing in our research, because some of the findings actually lost significance, others gained significance, and some of them actually make the significance even stronger. So the multivariate analysis, this table is like really important. First, we remember that between the 4 and 3 years program, we did not see any difference initially. However, when we accounted for all the variables, they become significant. With 4 years program, actually, residents performed better as the first-time pass rates only. Initial accreditation type stayed positive between ACGME and AOA. It stayed significance, which ACGME accredited program had the residents have first-time pass rates higher than AOA, which also older program had better pass rates than newer program, and program size, bigger program had better pass rates than smaller ones. Also, major teaching and between major teaching and teaching with non-teaching, we had to group them together to have these like binary variables, and we did not find any difference. With the bivariates, we did find the difference, which is also a really important point, that because especially with all the increased discussions about the neuro programs coming in, with the what kind of corporate, the faculty, the hospital ownership, if it's like major teaching is better than a public teaching, or if it's the faculty are corporate-based or academic or public. And we can see also military program lost its significance, percentage of graduating taking the exam lost its significance, ownership lost significance, and these are really important, and we're going to talk about them further. So this table is really nice just to summarize and to show how we had some significance from the bivariate, and we lost them sometimes with some of the variables, and with the others we actually gained. And the most important one, which I feel everybody wants to know about it, or like everybody, like the discussion is getting more and more now, is the program length. Yeah, between 4 years program and 3 years program, we are like one of the few residencies programs that have this like 3 years and 4 years training, so we can actually differentiate and see if they actually matter. And initially at the bivariate, we did not find any difference, but with the multivariate, we did find a significant difference. The initial accreditation type stayed the same, the year lost significance, older program stayed the same, and the program size, bigger program, also showed better pass rates than smaller programs. Couple of limitations to the study. It is only limited by 2 years. We don't have a lot of data yet. We definitely cannot infer causation. It's only an observational study. We're not sure how much this ABEM first-time pass rate actually matters for resident success or them being an attending and successful physician later on. Also the granularity of the ABEM pass rate. And these variables are so interconnected, and this is why we lost a lot of them significance from the bivariate to the multivariate. And this is actually like really important to see how complex our training environment is and how much it can be affected for us. So, like I said, several program characteristics initially appear to be correlated, and then we lost the significance. Many variables appear significant on the bivariate and no longer significant when controlling to confounders. And this can be explained by a lot of factors, right? Like bigger 4 years program, by intuition, we can think about like 1 more year of residency, 1 more year of doing garage questions or board questions every day and more structure. Or bigger programs have maybe a better structure and like more defined residency like training, and this can also affect their performance. Additionally, for the written exam, initial accreditation type, SAEM accreditation year and program size are associated. And it's also important between like SAEM and the AOA accreditation, which just like shows that the resources that are allocated for each institution to actually like credentials and prove the residency program. So multiple research actually talked about this recently, and since the results were published. And initially they only focused on the bivariate analysis, and we saw how the confounding variables are so interplay, and all the characteristics affect a lot, and they affect each other. Like, for example, bigger programs are historically older or historically academic, and these are all interplay and could like skew the results. So we actually find the same results with the previous papers, but we actually just took it a step further and we did the multivariate. And this was actually like a good thing, because like I said, some of the results initially were non-significant, but when we accounted to confounding, they became significant, and the opposite is actually true too. So for the SAEM accreditation year, similar to the topic paper, we found that it has been associated with both the QE and on the both bivariate and the multivariate. Program length, as initially we saw no significance on the bivariate, but when we accounted for the confounding values, we actually found a significance in change, and significance in performing, not to say better, but higher percent pass rates. So just like to summarize and to talk about it. So initially what the most important findings were for us, program length, that actually was significant and showed that it has increased pass rates, older programs, and SAEM accreditation. And these are all can be explained by, we cannot say for sure, we can just like generate hypothesis, and we can actually maybe now ask like, not who is succeeding, but in what environment and residency training they had to be for them to succeed. Thank you.
Come join me, come on. Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Nasrallah. That was a fantastic presentation. I'd like to start by asking you a question, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. You included physician group ownership type, which is really pretty novel. Why was that important to your study?
I feel like we can see there's a lot of discussion about newer programs coming in, and the faculty that are taking care of these residents can be from an academic standpoint, can be a hospital, like from the hospital ownership, or they can be private and corporate. And a lot of concerns from residents were, is this going to affect us as residents for our training, because they're coming from corporate, they have different priorities, or from academic that have also different priorities. And this was really important just to show that at least at the board certificate, the qualifying exam and the board level, we did not show any difference between the faculty ownership type, which is also like a good thing just to make sure that, and maybe reassure the residents, even though we cannot like infer any causation about the matter, but it's just an observation, and maybe like we can do more research later on and to see more, and like we have more data to see if it actually matters or no.
Patrick, one of the interesting findings, at least for me, was that program length became significant only after multivariate adjustment. Why do you think that happened?
So yeah, like I said, like these characteristics are all interplay between each other, and they have a lot of overlap. And I feel like at the beginning, when we did only the bivariate, we did not account to all of these, and I feel like all the variables diluted the data set and skewed the result for them to not to be significant. But when we adjusted for all of these variables and we compared them, we actually saw significance.
Thanks. A lot of variables lost significance after the adjustment, though. What message should residency leaders take away from this?
So I feel like the main message is the residency environment and training is very complex, and it's not as it is and very superficial. We need to dig deeper and make sure that we accounted. Even we feel that we haven't accounted for all the confounding variables, and maybe we can like do more research about it and ask. I feel like this is only this paper or this research mainly just like opened up doors for us to question more what actually could affect us as residents, not only our background or medical school education, but maybe also the residency environment, and how it can affect us succeeding later on, yes or no.
Your study showed newer ACGME accredited programs had lower qualifying exam pass rates.
Yeah.
What do you think explains that?
So it's just like having a newer program needs like establishment and more allocation of resources and faculty and actually like a training curriculum for them to succeed. And maybe newer program did not have the luxury or the time yet to actually do that. So maybe they just need more time to establish themselves and create a better learning or training route for the residents to succeed more in the board.
How do you think the data set should be used in future emergency medicine education research?
So this is actually a really good thing that what ABAM did, and we're grateful for it. It's just like, it's data that we can use it for a lot of other studies. We only looked at residency characteristics. We can actually infer other like possibilities that could actually cause or interfere in our education. It's having first-time pass rate does not mean that these residents are going to be better doctors, right? It's only one part of our education. There are like the communication, the teamwork, the procedures. These are all not accounted for, and maybe we can take it a step further and do that for the future research.
Great, thanks. I want to now open up questions to the audience. If you could come forward to the microphones, if anybody has any questions for Dr. Nasrallah.
You showed newer programs had a slower first-time pass rate than older programs. I would propose that one of the variables, which I don't see that you had accounted for, was the number of senior residents available to an incoming resident. I have found that the senior residents do a lot of the teaching to the junior residents, and a small program with no senior residents is going to be a less good teaching environment for the second class of incoming than a program, say, with 15 fourth-year residents and 15 third-year residents being available to help guide a new incoming intern. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, I agree. It's a very valid point. It goes the same, having not senior residents or having new faculty that have also not have a lot of experience, it goes the same. So it's all of it with the same idea of having a new program that has not been established yet, and it just needs a little bit more time to get more established. But I agree, like resident peer-to-peer teaching are very important. I always say that I always learn from my residents more than my attendings, and especially like on shift. And I agree with that. It's definitely a factor that could affect.
Thanks. If you could state your name and institution, please.
Sure. Hi, I'm Andrea. I'm from Virginia Tech. Very interesting topic, certainly timely with curriculum changes. Just curious, when you say you looked at all of the confounding variables for your multivariate, can you elaborate on that a little bit more?
Yeah, actually, we did not account for all the confounding variables. I'm sure, and we suggest that there might be more variables that we did not account for, but these are the variables that we chose. We felt that these are the data that we can extract from. We didn't want to go like even further because we don't want to crowd a lot the data sets and the research, but we chose like the most that we felt the most important for our like peers to see and maybe like evaluate. And we only accounted, like I said, that these variables that were shown, the older, newer program, bigger, smaller program, 3 or 4 years, initial accreditation type or year that also like showed like both significance. So we did not account for all the variables. We account for most, and I felt with these, like with what we accounted for, we found this significance, and hopefully maybe further research we can account for others too.
Got it. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, I think that was our last question. Let's give another round of applause to Dr. Nasrallah. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Our next study focuses on one of the most persistent challenges in care transitions, communication. Please welcome Dr. Jorge Frondino to join me here on the stage.
I'll just start out by saying I'm still so impressed that you get the pronunciation right. I mean, amazing. Thank you. Thank you. So good morning, everyone. I'm Jorge Frondino from the Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center in Boston, and I am joined here by Maria Cadman in the front row, who is our lead emergency medicine QA nurse. Today, I'm presenting our work on improving closed-loop communication and follow-up findings in emergency medicine. We have no conflicts of interest to disclose. We define an incidental finding as anything unrelated to the chief complaint and to the care that was rendered during the visit. We are seeing a perfect storm: an aging population, the availability of cheaper and better testing technology, and the practice of defensive medicine. Taken all together, they are driving up the number of tests and the number of incidental findings, where faulty communication may lead to patient harm and malpractice liability. Our baseline system relied on a nurse-led QA team, overseeing multiple EDs and urgent cares with different EHRs, totaling over 100,000 visits a year. This team reviewed all the laboratory and imaging results from the prior 24 hours against a set of triggers. They would consult a senior emergency medicine physician when in doubt, calling patients back if need be, and always notifying PCPs over secure email. But here's the reality. Imagine a PCP on a Monday morning. They have 22 patients to see, 18 weekend portal messages, and 56 weekend emails. In that environment, a Saturday email about a pulmonary nodule is easily buried. And if the PCP does see it, did they reply to it? And if so, did they do anything about the follow-up? We partnered with primary care and launched an intervention to bridge these gaps. Soon we realized the issue was not just the use of email to communicate our findings. Rather, it was a culture of us versus them and an overburdened and over-alerted PCP population. We created a QA committee with representation from both emergency medicine and primary care, with nurses and physicians and data scientists, clarifying accountability and leadership support. Together, we reviewed and refined our triggers and workflows and jointly developed an EHR-independent shared dashboard between emergency medicine and primary care, with continuous measurement, feedbacking into the QA committee and driving refinements. We defined urgency through a red, orange, green tier system. Red findings, like new suspected malignancies, would require a direct phone call with a PCP and a 48-hour email follow-up. Orange findings are concerning, but allow for a 48-hour email follow-up, while green represents routine follow-up within a month. The heart of the solution is our web-based dashboard. Our emergency medicine QA nurses log the incidental findings, indicating patient and visit details, characterizing the finding acuity, the type, whether or not there was a clear recommendation present, and which PCP was notified, while also being able to view what the primary care has filled out in their side of the dashboard in relation to each incidental finding. On the PCP side of the dashboard, it allows for the downstream tracking, indicating whether the PCP plans to follow up or not, as they may state, "This is not my patient, I previously knew about this finding," or "It's actually an unwarranted finding." The dashboard also shows how many days the finding has been pending. And it allows the team to nudge the PCP until the loop is closed and the finding is documented as resolved. So we went about evaluating our solution over 2 12-month periods across 2 EDs and 2 urgent care centers, tracking over 3,600 incidental findings, and looking at 2 primary outcomes. Did the PCP acknowledge receipt? And was there documented evidence of timely follow-up? The results are clear. Post-intervention, PCPs were twice as likely to establish closed-loop communication and 4 times more likely to complete timely follow-up. Most importantly, these gains occurred regardless of whether the emergency medicine and PCP facilities shared an EHR. Also, we established that higher acuity and templated recommendations were positively associated with improved outcomes. In conclusion, we have demonstrated that an EHR-independent web-based dashboard in close collaboration with primary care can significantly improve patient safety. It moves us from hoping follow-up happens to ensuring it happens. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Frodino.
Thank you.
That was a wonderful presentation. I'd like to welcome you, and also your colleague here, Maria Cadman, to discuss this further. I'm going to start first with, why is the EHR independent tracking so critical when systems like Epic already have care everywhere?
Thank you. It's a common misconception that shared EHR will make the problem of interoperability and communication go away. Care everywhere does not make the data automatically available. It still requires a clinician to pull that data manually. And the organizations need to be proactive in making that data available. What our research has shown is that the issue, the true gap, is not so much about the software, but rather the workflow. So by making available an independent dashboard, we created a single persistent source of truth that essentially eliminated all that in-basket fatigue that was created by automated EHR notifications. And we slowly moved from just sending out these notifications to PCPs to making sure that they were actually closing the loop and giving them the means to then follow up on those findings.
So let's talk about the bottom line, right? I'm a department chair. So for us department chairs and hospital administrators in the audience, what's the business case for implementing this? I mean, it takes a lot of time, right? A lot of people work here.
It does, it does. So what I would say is that the business case is clear when we consider that the diagnostic failure is the leading cause of, one of the leading causes of malpractice. And as you saw on the slide, the average case costs about $500,000. But not only that, there's a huge professional toil for the several years that this is running in litigation for your providers. So essentially, when we talk about quadrupling the likelihood of follow-up occurring, the system essentially pays for itself. All it takes is for us to get one of those incidental findings that would otherwise have been missed. More recently, we started to see that the benefit pays for itself, not so much in terms of what we avoid, but also in terms of volume that we're actually inadvertently creating. When PCPs have gotten back to us and said, well, actually, we're referring more patients to you, to your EDs and your urgent cares, because we know that they will not fall through the shuffle. So those are thoughts that come to mind from a systems thinking perspective, but I think that there's also clinical benefits to be said, and for that I'd like to ask my colleague Maria to contribute.
Hi. So I think, as we all know, DED tends to focus on saving life and limb, but we sometimes forget that patients, that it can be an overwhelming environment for patients. Also, patients in crisis aren't always able to process the information they're given. Once they go home or are discharged, they forget those discharge instructions or they just overlook them. A lot of patients don't engage in patient portals. So closing the loop with the PCPs isn't really just about liability, but it's also about ensuring that the patient gets the continuity of care that DD by nature cannot provide. It really is how medicine should work.
I'm curious, how many nurses do you have working this program currently?
There's 4 of us working part-time. We have a per diem. We have 2 nurses working every day, and some days can be 8 to 10-hour days. We review a lot of reports.
Thanks. So what are the key clinical takeaways you've learned about primary care and how having clinical decisions or workflows in the QA office have changed as a result?
What I will say from the get-go is it was our realization that primary care was not ignoring our notifications. They were simply overwhelmed by noise because they get bombarded from everywhere with anything, not just from us, from multiple different systems. So we really had to transition from this model of volume, of telling them about all the notifications and just making sure we push that information out, to adding clinical value that they would appreciate and know that what to respond to. Once again, I'd like to ask for specific insight from Maria.
So we all agree that the PCP has the established relationship, and they're vital for follow-up. But they're busy, so they actually need value versus noise. Initially, we used to feel like I'm in an awkward position here. Initially, we wanted to forward everything, but quickly learned that the PCPs are actually most interested in those findings that have a clear recommendation for follow-up, which makes sense. They are higher liability risk. They also have specific concerns, such as pulmonary nodules. So based on this, we adapted our workflow in the QA office. We revised our triggers, such as forwarding pneumonias based not only on recommendation for repeat imaging, but also based on risk factors such as age and pulmonary disease. We also adjusted our triggers for elevated glucose on non-diabetic patients. And our workflow really has become a reliable safety net for the PCP, who can now be reassured that incidental findings are being tracked and won't just fall through the cracks.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, got to ask this question, right? We just had a whole lecture on AI. Seems like this would be perfect, right? They could do robocalls and tell the office, like, you know, how do you see this evolving with AI?
Well, what I will say is, to begin with, where we are on the maturity curve, we absolutely need our dashboard coordinators because they are addressing all these gaps that we inherently have in the infrastructure and getting a holistic knowledge about the patient. And as we've heard just now this morning from our awesome keynote speaker and the multiple talks that I've attended already yesterday, I think it is indeed a journey. And we are at various levels of maturity depending on the individual organizations. And some of the questions that we're faced with, for instance, in terms of will AI actually have access to all the fragmented data, which nowadays we don't actually have easy access to? Who's actually going to be liable for any AI-generated notifications? And also, by the way, are we going to once again overwhelm the PCPs and completely undermine the system as we once did? So there's clearly some key questions that we're asking ourselves. But having said that, we are well into the journey. So our first step has been QAing the QA process. So we were actually using AI to figure out, have we actually missed anything? But we already foresee other steps, and I'm really wanting to actually follow up with several of the people that I've heard talks here, as I mentioned, because some of those steps we were already planning for, and it seems that there's already a lot of movement in some of those steps, such as assessing whether there's an incidental finding there. And by the way, I don't mean just by large language models. I'm talking about even as we're thinking about computer vision and deep learning in assessing the actual images themselves. So there's a lot that could be done upstream, but then also in terms of downstream with regards to, can we actually get this patient in with the time frame that is required for this specific finding? So there's so much that we can do. It's really exciting, and we're very happy to be part of that conversation and to contribute.
Great. I'm going to now open up the floor to questions. If anybody in the audience has a question you'd like to ask the speakers?
Please don't be shy, not everyone at once.
Okay.
Okay.
I think then that was our last question.
Fantastic.
If we could give another round. I'm sorry. Is there someone? I can't see. Sorry, thank you. Please name and institution.
Hi, my name is Maida. I'm in the Lurie Children's and Northwestern system, and through the pandemic, we saw an explosion locally of urgent care centers, and most of our inflow of patients comes from urgent cares. And the challenge there is that there's no real ownership when urgent care doctors kind of refer in, but in fact, urgent cares have become sort of a primary care replacement. Have you thought about that sort of closed loop communication, not only for patient safety, but also improvement in the delivery of urgent care? Thanks.
Thank you. I think that's a great question, and actually that speaks beyond our part of research. We are fortunate to be part of a system that, in terms of the leadership and vision, we've embarked in terms of having our own urgent cares, recognizing that there were gaps with regards to patient safety and in terms of having access, timely access to their PCPs. And so we've integrated our own internal urgent cares for that matter, and our group is tracking the findings generated from those urgent cares. Now, having said that, what we ultimately want to be able to do is to scale our system such that we're able to offer similar capability for the urgent cares. So if said urgent cares are making the information available to primary care, this would find its way into our system so that then we can catalog in terms of our dashboard and ensure that there's continuity of care downstream.
Well, thank you for your work and sharing it with all of us.
Thank you.
Yep, a round of applause, please.
Thank you so much.
And for our final presentation today, we turn to an area that demands both clinical precision and deep empathy. Please welcome Dr. Ambuj Suri.
Thank you, Dr. Promise. My name is Ambuj Suri. I'm one of the PGY4s at Brown University. So I'm here representing this wonderful team of researchers that I was able to work with, all representing the audience over here. I'll be presenting our research study entitled Differences in Emergency Department Pain Management Between Adolescents and Young Adults with Sickle Cell Disease. We have no disclosures to report. So vaso-occlusive episodes are the leading cause of ED visits in sickle cell disease. We all know this. We've all seen patients who come to our EDs with sickle cell disease and in a lot of acute pain. Current guidelines recommend timely parenteral medication with an emphasis on opioid administration for management of this pain. Timely pain management is critical, but often inconsistent across EDs. We also know that there's a key difference between the way we approach pediatric and adult care in terms of sickle cell disease as well as pain management. So there's this transitional period between pediatrics to adults as patients transition from one setting to another that's associated with declines in satisfaction as well as those inconsistencies that I just mentioned. There's also limited data comparing ED pain management strategies across these age groups during this transitional period. So our study really aimed to look at to compare the opioid-based pain management strategies between adolescents between the years of 12 to 17 and young adults between the years of 18 to 25 among those who are presenting to emergency departments in the United States for vaso-occlusive episodes in sickle cell disease. Our methods, so we conducted a retrospective study using the nationwide emergency department sample between the years of 2016 to 2020. Our total analytic sample included greater than 200,000 weighted ED visits. We did focus specifically on those who were treated and discharged from the ED, given that the NEDS database really limited our ability to understand whether this pain medication was administered in the ED versus in inpatient settings. So we really wanted to focus on ED provider strategy specifically, so we just focused on that population of treated and discharged. Our data analysis included a weighted descriptive statistics in addition to a temporal trend analysis using a Cochrane-Armitage trend test for medication utilization over time between the years of 2016 to 2020. We also conducted a multivariable logistic regression with our primary outcome of whether or not a patient received an IV opioid and controlling for specific variables of year, age group, sex, primary payer, hospital region, trauma level, as well as teaching status. Going to our results. One key finding that I want to highlight here is that of all of the patients that we looked at, both adolescents as well as young adults, for those who presented for vaso-occlusive episodes to the ED, less than 2/3 received IV opioid analgesics. Looking at our descriptive analysis, across the board here, I won't bore you with each bar, but basically adolescents overall compared to young adults had received less IV opioids, but more multimodal pain strategies. Looking at our trend analysis, of the IV opioid pain medication, with some variability over time between 2016 to 2020, adolescents, again, consistently had received less IV opioids compared to young adults. Looking at our IV non-opioid pain medication, contrastingly, there was an increase between the years of 2016 to 2020 in terms of the multimodal pain strategies that adolescents had received as well as young adults. But again, consistently, adolescents had received more IV non-opioid compared to young adults. Looking at ketamine, since we all love ketamine, there was a consistent trend that young adults received IV ketamine much less frequently than adolescents. And then going back to our multivariable logistic regression, beyond time as well as age, the only factor that we found that was significant among all the factors that we had looked at was region. Specifically, coming from Western region actually decreased the odds of receiving IV opioid when compared to the Northeast. Our study does have some limitations. So our data set limits knowledge of doses as well as time of administration of the medication in the ED. We also specifically looked at those who were treated and discharged in the ED specifically. So for that reason, there is a possibility that we're missing this sample of admitted patients who may have had more severe disease requiring admission as well as more IV opioid. We're also missing some clinical details. It's possible that the pain severity of these patients, specifically in the adolescent age group, were offered an IV opioid but had declined, or they were given an IV Toradol, and with that multimodal pain strategy, not including an IV opioid, their pain was fully well controlled and they were able to leave the ED. But what does this mean? Across the board, adolescents had received less IV opioid compared to young adults for their presentation of a vaso-occlusive episode in sickle cell disease in the ED. This means that there's clearly a disparity, and we really want to be able to postulate that there's importance in standardizing multimodal pain management across age groups, but including IV opioids in that multimodal pain strategy. We want to improve transitional care pathways, knowing that that critical transition from being a pediatric patient to an adult patient is super important to be able to maintain consistency, especially among pain management strategies of vaso-occlusive episodes when patients present to the ED. And looking at the geographic disparities, we want to address this idea of systemic as well as geographic disparities, specifically in the Western region, knowing that regional differences should not change management of vaso-occlusive episodes, of patients who are presenting for vaso-occlusive episodes in the ED. So overall, our data suggests that IV opioids should be included in multimodal pain strategies for patients with vaso-occlusive episodes. And we want to be able to improve opioid utilization, specifically for adolescents, knowing that it may decrease admissions as well as improve pain management for these patients. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Suri, for this incredible presentation.
Thank you.
I'd like to start by asking you a question, if that's
Perfect.
okay.
Yeah,
Great. What are your thoughts on the relevance of your data, given the findings only look at data until 2020 and from 6 years ago?
Definitely. So we actually started looking at additional data from the NEDS database, and we're re-demonstrating these similar trends. Obviously, COVID had impacted the ways that we approach multiple diagnoses within the ED, as well as the way we manage pain. However, that being said, it looks like looking at that preliminary data, we're looking at that similar trend, so we're hoping to really demonstrate that over time. And yeah, stay tuned for that.
So why do you think that only 2/3 of the total population you looked at received IV opioids?
Opioids obviously are a very socially and culturally fraught medication. Something that I counsel patients on is that when they present to emergency departments, they're clearly in acute pain that is requiring an opioid. However, that's not necessarily the approach of every emergency department physician. I think both patients, families, as well as physicians have this idea of hesitancy with opioids. And it's something that this study specifically wants to really unveil, specifically for patients with sickle cell disease who have been historically marginalized and have experienced a lot of bias from providers. So I think that's probably a big part of it, and that's one of the reasons we really wanted to identify what is this true disparity and how do we really close that gap. Because less than 2/3 of patients with vaso-occlusive episodes with true pain is really not enough if we're not treating their pain effectively.
Yeah. So, we know about the opioid epidemic, right? How do you think it impacted your data and the results that you found?
Yeah, definitely. It's hard to say because when we're looking at the data itself, it's hard to postulate exactly what was driving that difference. Something that we've postulated is the idea of training environment, but the region itself, and really the regional differences when it comes to the idea of, well, what is the local burden of disease? How is that local burden of disease impacting the way that we're managing that disease within emergency department settings? So I think that's a big part of it. It's hard to say exactly what that driving factor is, but at the end of the day, I think that the IV opioid for vaso-occlusive episodes, that knowing that it is actually most helpful for patients, it's hard to be able to say whether or not that was driven by a certain bias or teaching environment or regional environment without really looking at more qualitative data to understand, in addition to the quantitative disparity that we've identified, what else are we missing or looking at.
At the data that you were able to obtain from the data set, did you see that how the opioids were delivered? Like,
yes,
you could tell if it was IV, intranasal.
So that's a great question. NEDS, unfortunately, we're not able to really drive down in terms of the actual route of administration. However, for pediatric patients, obviously we know that intranasal medication is definitely useful without having to start an IV. We identified that looking at when providers ordered an IV opioid, that IV opioid could be placed in an atomizer. So when they're ordering something that's IV, it's likely administered intranasally. However, the NEDS database doesn't actually delineate whether or not it was oral, intranasal, or IV, or oral, intranasal, or oral. They're hard to look at.
Got it. Let's open up questions to the audience. If anyone's interested in asking a question, please come forward to the microphone and state your name and institution. I'm actually going to ask a different question here. I've had the privilege of practicing emergency medicine on the East Coast, in the South, and on the West Coast. And I agree that the way people approach patients with sickle cell disease varies. I mean, I worked at one institution. You walked into the emergency department, and they had a care plan, and they would be put on a PCA.
Yeah.
Like that started in the emergency department for their pain, to recently having a faculty member saying, I don't like to give opioids for pain, for sickle cell, and across. Why do you think it's so disparate?
Yeah, I think the actual cultural aspect of where patients are also changes things. In the Northeast, there are a lot more patients with sickle cell disease, at least, so I've only practiced in the Northeast, both in Philadelphia as well as Rhode Island. But knowing that there's a lot more patients with sickle cell disease, I think there's a lot more provider comfort. We have a lot more education around how to approach these patients, how to be able to provide them pain management within the ED, both timely as well as effectively. It's possible that that could be the difference, is that there are just less patients with sickle cell disease, and there's less exposure to these patients. So I think that's probably what I would postulate, but again, I think we need more qualitative understanding of what is really driving this difference.
Well, thank you. I think that was our last question. Again, a round of applause, please.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
As we close today's main stage session, I hope you leave with more than just new information, but with new questions and new ideas, and a renewed sense of purpose in the work that we do every day. Because the future of emergency medicine isn't defined by any one of the studies we talked about today, it's defined by all of us, together. Thank you again, and please visit the presenters at SAM booth 315 for a meet and greet. See you guys later.